Wife left me, came back with a baby begging for a second chance. Am I wrong for shutting the door in her face? You've heard the phrase, "I never saw it coming," repeatedly, right? For me, it was precisely that way. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed we were in agreement, and we had a life plan laid out. The problem is that, at least in my opinion, we both desired children. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly talk about how she wanted 2 or 3 children. She would even plan this life with our future children while browsing baby gear and clothing online. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. Everything appeared ideal, and we were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together. However, we received some terrible news that left me speechless. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long story short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. All those plans we had suddenly disappeared, and I felt worthless. I was really hit hard by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that she would be content with just the two of us and that it didn't matter. However, there was something strange about the way she said it. Right from the start, she was talking about having a family one minute, and then she was claiming that she didn't need children to be happy. Don't get me wrong, I understand that individuals have second thoughts, but her entire demeanor seemed strange to me. She had stopped thinking about baby names and was now completely avoiding any conversation about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never said before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself. Indeed, I may have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude, claiming that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only imagining things. But I was aware of a problem. This was different from the woman I had married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me, discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely following the rules. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay in order to avoid coming off as needy or insecure. I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were just getting by. We had fallen into a rut where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other options, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. "I'm happy as long as we're together," she would remark, but I never really understood. She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. Then she suddenly told me that she wanted to go on a girls' trip. She had gone on a few excursions with her friends before, and I had always encouraged her to do so, so it wasn't strange for her to do so now. She had been talking for a while about wanting to travel to America with her pals, and we lived in Brighton. We had developed trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. "Thank you for being so supportive," she added, turning to face me. She sounded so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude, even though I found it a little strange that she would say that. It's not like I had done anything really noteworthy. I stayed up that night to make sure everything went well, calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching television, keeping an eye on the time, and waiting for her to text me to let me know she had landed. Her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed, but the phone kept ringing and nobody picked up. I didn't give it much thought at first because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, by the time morning arrived, I still hadn't heard from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on silent, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, after a couple more hours of radio silence, I was officially freaking out. In the end, I called her sister to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. I even went so far as to call her friends, who were supposed to accompany her on the trip. But since they weren't traveling with her, they were also perplexed. When I contacted them back at home, they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It dawned on me then that she wasn't traveling with friends. She wasn't on a girls' trip, and she hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She had simply vanished. It felt as though my stomach had fallen through the floor. Sitting there with the phone, why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I attempted to convince myself that it was an error of some sort. Perhaps she had missed a connecting flight, or had been unable to contact me due to an emergency, but I knew in my heart that she had planned this. Her saying thank you for your support and the entire girls' trip scenario were all parts of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up. It felt like I was living in a nightmare. I didn't marry this woman. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night hoping for a call, a text, or anything else. But nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when I saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. She had gathered her belongings and disappeared. The assurances I had given myself the previous evening that perhaps she was late or her phone had died were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I kept calling her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages constantly in the hope that she would understand, even though I was often at a loss for words. However, all I received was silence, which strangely made things worse. I felt like I had been a stranger to her the entire time and had been left to work it out on my own without any clue as to what went wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me, because when I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit and listen as I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, trying to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. To be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. I would constantly ask myself what went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to figure out what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. I realize this seems dramatic, but I was completely fixated on finding the solution, as if it would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People noticed and inquired about my well-being, to which I would just respond that I was occupied with personal matters. Declaring aloud that my wife had vanished seemed too bizarre for anyone to believe. No one really knew what had occurred. About a month later, I received a phone call that turned my life upside down. It was her on the other end of the phone, explaining that she was sorry for everything that happened. Her words were almost impossible to process, but here's the thing. She was back, but not alone. She had a child. Update. The moment I heard her voice, I froze. For a brief second I thought I was imagining it, that I was hearing the voice of a ghost or a memory. But no, it was her. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, tentative, as though she weren't sure how I'd respond. I could hardly breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, and all the thoughts I'd pushed away, the anger, the confusion, the devastation came rushing back in an overwhelming wave. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to throw my phone across the room and forget this ever happened. But instead I just stood there silent, paralyzed by a cocktail of emotions that left me speechless. "Are you okay?" she asked after a long pause. It was almost like she was asking it out of some reflex, as if nothing had changed. I finally managed to speak, though my voice felt like it came from a stranger. "Where the hell have you been? What do you mean you're back? And why do I hear a baby crying in the background?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. For a moment I thought maybe she had hung up. But then she responded, her voice trembling, as if she was bracing herself for the words she knew were about to come. I don't know where to start," she said. "I should have called sooner, but I didn't know what to say. I've been a mess. You have no idea how hard this has been for me." I felt my grip on the phone tighten as the questions swirled in my mind. A mess. Hard. What was she talking about? Where had she been? "Start by telling me why you left," I said, my voice almost a whisper, full of disbelief. "Why did you leave me? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you let me know you were gone? I thought something had happened to you. I thought—" "I'm sorry," she interrupted. "I should have done this face to face, but it's—" She paused, and I could hear the baby crying in the background again, faintly, as though it were far off in another room. "Is that—" I asked, my voice trembling now. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Her name is Lily." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Lily. Was she serious? My mind raced. Had she been seeing someone else? Had she had an affair? Was this child his? "You—" I managed to choke out. "Please, just listen to me. It's not what you think, please. Just let me explain." I wanted to tell her to stop, to hang up, to end it right then and there. But I couldn't. I was too deep in this mess, and despite everything, a part of me still wanted to hear her out. I wanted to know the truth. What the hell had happened? I I wasn't honest with you," she continued, almost whispering. "After I left, I went to visit my sister. I wasn't going on a girls' trip. I was lying to you. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I was." I could feel the tension building inside me, and I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to stay steady. "What do you mean? What you had done?" She took a deep breath, then began. "I I met someone after we'd been struggling, and I couldn't get pregnant. I was so lost." A pit opened up in my stomach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at her, to throw the phone away, to forget I ever heard her voice. But instead I stood there, numb, as the pieces of our life, the life we had built together, began to shatter. "I didn't want to leave you. I thought about you every day, but—" She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. I stood there frozen, unable to process the depth of what she was saying. It felt like everything was spinning out of control, and I couldn't find my footing. The silence between us stretched on long enough for me to hear the sound of a baby crying again, louder now. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to me with this? We could have worked through it. I could have helped you, but you just—" "I know," she said softly. "I know I was selfish. I didn't want to hurt you. But in the end I hurt you even more." I see that now. I should have been honest from the start, but I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. I didn't think we could ever go back." There was a long pause, and I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. It was as though everything we had built together, our marriage, our life— "Why didn't you tell me about the baby?" I finally asked. "Why did you wait until now?" "I was scared. I thought you would hate me. I thought you would never forgive me. I didn't want you to think I had abandoned you forever. I wanted you to have a life without me, to move on." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. I felt like I was unraveling. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What happens now, Laura? What do you expect from me?" "I don't know," she admitted. I just— I wanted to reach out. I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted to apologize. I understand. If you never want to speak to me again, I— The room felt suddenly suffocating, and I felt the walls closing in on me. I couldn't keep up with the rush of emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion, betrayal. I wanted to scream, to rail at her, to demand why she had done this. But I was also so tired, so empty. "I need time," I said finally, my voice raw. "I need to think. I can't." "I understand," she whispered. "I don't expect anything from you right now. I just—" "I'll think about it," I said almost mechanically. And then I hung up, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the phone in my hand, still processing the conversation, the revelation. My world, what I thought I knew, had been turned upside down. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, had made choices that I couldn't even begin to understand. And now I had a choice of my own to make. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what to do with this new version of my life. Should I reach out to her again? Could I forgive her? Could I even look at her the same way again? The questions lingered unanswered. I didn't know the answers yet, and I didn't know when or if I ever would.